All right. Good afternoon, class. I apologize if I yawn. It's been a little tiresome at the Casey household lately with the children. Um, but we have been asked to discuss Unit 5 and unionization for nurses. So let's talk about the National Labor Relations Act. And um, so I looked at the paper that Ms. Kelly gave us. And so, way back in 1935, Congress passed this act, which essentially protects workplace democracy, allowing employees of a union the freedom to strike for better work conditions. For example, wages, benefits, housing. A good example of this that I thought of, my brain instantly went to the Blair Mountain Mine Wars. That's actually happened where in the county that I grew up in Logan, West Virginia. Um, so there were miners in the area. They formed a union and went on strike against the mine owners. And so essentially, what ended up happening is the military was actually called in to have to try to shut that down. And they did eventually, but it was an all out war. And they were, you know, these miners were subjected to very dangerous work conditions. They were given next to no pay in a form called scrip, which they could only spend at company mine shops. And they were often recruited from areas far away from they were from, so that would necessitate housing, and the housing just wasn't very good. But with this act, employees were given the right to form organizations and collective bargaining agreements without fear of retaliation by the employers. And so, conversely, the employer is not allowed to interfere with these organizations of the labor union, nor are they allowed to contribute to the formation financially or otherwise. And a few questions that we might would want to ask before we do this would be: Will the union benefit or harm healthcare? And perhaps, what are the pros and cons of nursing unions? And our book has a list of other questions found on page 267 that I looked at, such as: Will the union pay wages to employees if they are called on to strike? And will the union guarantee in writing that employees will not be permanently replaced during an economic strike? That would obviously be quite important. Would I still get paid, and am I going to have a job when we're done? With regards to pros and cons, the ultimate goal of healthcare is to care for patients. And just as Cherry states in this chapter, nurses need to reflect on the issues beyond what unions typically address, like wages and hours. We think about healthcare because we're dealing with people's lives, and often wage and benefit increases aren't correlating to better patient care environments. So, according to Cherry, she talked about some studies that showed that union representation was negatively associated with job satisfaction, also negative effects on work environments, and found that unionized hospitals also had lower patient satisfaction scores. However, some issues like timely physician visits, lack of administrative support, and inadequate nursing staff could be all pros that could be addressed by unions. But if you ask me, I'd rather make sure that the patients are cared for than, making sure I've got and be a little short staffed, in the long run. But I care. What do you got? But then, with regards to management, which is my position, it can be difficult to coach staff because these unions' representation could often, encourage the union staff to be what Sherry uses is called the silent treatment. And then often management is left to perform the staff duties in the event of a strike. And, not that that's necessarily bad. I mean, I go out and help my people all the time. But overall, in the big picture of things, that sounds all the way bad. Cherry also shares with us some communication strategies found on that same page of 267. And these are designed to help facilitate sound relationships between the management teams and the labor force. So she recommends assessing knowledge of your labor laws and practices, understand the culture of the facility involved, and seek transparency and communication before unionization events begins. And it's important to understand laws that may be already in place for protection of nurses' rights, and we should also develop an understanding of the healthcare facility's financial challenges so that we can become part of the solution for cost-effective care. And the latter of that being quite eye-opening once you get into this side of the thing and you start kind of seeing how the wheels of the hospital work and the inner motions of things. I know as a staff nurse working on the floor, I knew nothing about what the hospital was actually going through. And that really helps to understand. So, from a manager perspective, I would not seek to have someone fired for being involved in union organization efforts. And I think everyone has the right to, if they wanted to seek a union. However, to what extent are they using the organization's name or likeness? Right. So I think those things come into play, especially if the organization has certain rules and regulations that someone may have to have the potential to violate. When they might when they're getting involved in these things. However, after reading through the chapter, unless everyone in the entire organization went union, I think someone might have a difficult time afterward due to the lopsided benefits and wages and all those types of things. They talked about, physical therapy may not be union, but nursing might be union, and then they start to clash. There might be some resentment. It just seems like unless everybody gets a piece of the pie, it's probably not going to be good for anybody. And so that person might actually end up leaving on their own accord from scrutiny, right, among the other teams. But this union discussion has been quite eye-opening. And thanks for listening.